The effects of the Birmingham bin strike have been declared a major incident. They are a national embarrassment, and with 21-degree temperatures forecast for later this week, will become a public health emergency.
The House of Commons chamber was charged with tension as accusations flew across the parliamentary benches. At the center of the storm stood Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner, facing intense scrutiny over their handling of the Birmingham bin collection crisis. What began as a local dispute had escalated into something far more serious, with allegations of political corruption and questions about union influence threatening to shake the foundations of Labour leadership. The Birmingham bin strike had reached a critical tipping point. Streets across Britain's second largest city were overflowing with refuse, creating scenes that politicians on all sides described as a national embarrassment. The situation had deteriorated so rapidly that local authorities were forced to declare a major incident, activating emergency protocols typically reserved for natural disasters or terrorist attacks. With temperatures forecast to reach 21 degrees Celsius later in the week, what was already a public relations nightmare for the Labour Party was threatening to become a genuine public health emergency. The combination of rotting waste, rising temperatures, and stagnant air created perfect conditions for disease vectors to multiply. Health officials warned of potential outbreaks of food poisoning, respiratory infections, and pest-related illnesses that could affect thousands of Birmingham residents. The timing could not have been worse for Labour politicians. While their constituents struggled with overflowing bins and the stench of decomposing waste, several Labour MPs from Birmingham constituencies were notably absent from the crisis. Instead of addressing the mounting refuse crisis, these representatives were reportedly busy campaigning for infrastructure projects in Pakistan, including proposals for airport development that would benefit Pakistani communities. This absence did not go unnoticed by opposition members who seized upon the apparent disconnect between Labour priorities and local constituent needs. The optics were damaging. While Birmingham suffered under piles of uncollected garbage, its elected representatives were focusing their energy on international projects rather than immediate domestic concerns. The Secretary of State's reluctance to visit Birmingham personally became a focal point of parliamentary criticism. Opposition members questioned whether this hesitation stemmed from genuine scheduling conflicts or something more politically sensitive. The suggestion that emerged was far more damaging, that Labour leadership was deliberately avoiding direct engagement with the crisis due to their complex financial relationships with the trade unions involved. Unite the Union, one of Britain's largest and most powerful trade unions, had emerged as a central player in the Birmingham dispute. The union's involvement was not merely procedural, they were actively supporting the striking workers and had significant leverage in negotiations. This created a delicate political situation for Labour politicians who relied heavily on union support, both financially and organisationally. The financial connections between Labour and Unite ran deep and extensive. Over recent years, Unite had donated tens of millions of pounds to the Labour Party, making them one of the party's most significant financial backers. These donations funded everything from national campaigns to local constituency operations, creating a web of financial dependency that critics argued compromised Labour's ability to act independently in industrial disputes. The personal dimension of these relationships became even more controversial when specific donation amounts were revealed. Angela Rayner herself had received £10,000 from Unite for her own election campaign, a substantial sum that represented a significant portion of her campaign budget. This direct financial relationship raised immediate questions about potential conflicts of interest when dealing with United-led industrial action. Opposition MPs pressed hard on these connections, suggesting that Labour leadership was effectively captured by union interest. They argued that the party's reluctance to take decisive action against the Birmingham strike stemmed not from principled support for workers' rights, but from financial dependence on union donations. The implication was clear. Labour politicians were prioritizing their funding relationships over their constituents' immediate needs. The parliamentary exchange that followed was sharp and personal. When confronted about these financial ties, Labour representatives initially attempted to deflect criticism by characterizing the accusations as beneath parliamentary dignity. Angela Rayner responded with visible frustration, suggesting that opposition members were engaging in unfair personal attacks rather than constructive political discourse. However, the substance of the accusations proved difficult to dismiss entirely. The financial relationships were matters of public record, documented in official donation registers and campaign finance reports. The amounts involved were substantial enough to represent genuine influence, and the timing of the donations created obvious potential for conflicts of interest. Labour's defense centered on the principle that the Birmingham dispute should be resolved through local negotiations rather than central government intervention. They argued that this approach respected both local autonomy and established industrial relations procedures. The party maintained that both striking workers and Birmingham City Council should return to negotiation tables to find mutually acceptable solutions. This position had some procedural merit. Industrial disputes are typically resolved through direct negotiation between employers and unions, with government intervention reserved for exceptional circumstances. Labour argued that precipitous central government action could set dangerous precedents for future industrial relations, potentially undermining the entire framework of collective bargaining. Yet critics pointed out that the situation had already moved beyond typical industrial dispute parameters. The declaration of a major incident suggested that normal negotiation processes had failed to prevent serious public harm. Under these circumstances, they argued, central government had both authority and responsibility to intervene more decisively. The health implications of the crisis added urgency to these debates. Medical professionals warned that prolonged accumulation of refuse created serious disease risks, particularly for vulnerable populations, including children, elderly residents, and people with compromised immune systems. The approaching warm weather would accelerate decomposition processes, potentially creating breeding grounds for disease-carrying insects and rodents. Environmental health officers began documenting specific risks associated with the accumulating waste. Organic matter decomposition released methane and hydrogen sulfide gases, creating respiratory hazards for nearby residents. Liquid waste runoff threatened to contaminate local water sources, while scattered refuse attracted rats, flies, and other disease vectors that could spread infections throughout the community. If you want to stay updated on how this political crisis unfolds and affects communities across Britain, make sure to subscribe to our channel for the latest developments and analysis. The economic implications extended beyond immediate health costs. Birmingham's reputation as a major business and tourist destination was suffering visible damage. International visitors and business partners were confronted with scenes of urban decay that contradicted the city's carefully cultivated image as a modern, well-managed metropolitan center. Local businesses reported declining customer traffic as people avoided areas with particularly severe waste accumulation. Restaurants and food retailers faced additional challenges as customers questioned hygiene standards in neighborhoods where refuse had been accumulating for weeks. The longer the strike continued, the more severe these economic impacts would become. Property values in affected areas began showing early signs of decline as potential buyers and renters sought alternatives in cleaner neighborhoods. Real estate agents reported increased difficulty marketing properties in areas with visible waste accumulation, creating ripple effects throughout local housing markets. The political ramifications extended far beyond Birmingham's city limits. Labour's handling of the crisis was being scrutinized as a test case for how the party would manage industrial disputes if returned to national government. Critics argued that the party's apparent inability to resolve a local waste collection dispute raised serious questions about their capacity to handle complex national challenges. Conservative politicians seized upon the crisis as evidence of Labour's fundamental unsuitability for government. They argued that the party's union dependencies created structural conflicts of interest that would prevent effective governance on issues involving organized labor. The Birmingham situation became a microcosm of broader concerns about Labour's ability to balance competing interests and make difficult decisions. The opposition strategy focused on highlighting the disconnect between Labour's stated values and their practical actions. While the party claimed to represent ordinary working families, their handling of the Birmingham crisis suggested they prioritized union relationships over constituent welfare. This narrative had potential to resonate with voters who felt abandoned. by political establishments more concerned with organizational interests than public service. Parliamentary procedures ensured that these debates would continue beyond initial exchanges.